Welcome to the Flybubble Paragliding channel.
We are free flight experts and equipment specialists helping you get the best flying experience.
Welcome to another free Flybubble video. In this video we're going to talk about Jin's new high B glider, the Avid, which is the standard weight version of the Explorer 2 in a way. On paper the two gliders look pretty much, if not identical. One of the obvious differences is the materials. The Avid has been made with a new material, Muyon. Sorry for saying that wrong. It's a fabric for harsh environments. So that's one of the features that Jin are really promoting with the Avid. And actually for a while, Jin haven't had really a standard weight high B glider. They've only had a lightweight. The Explorer 1 has been around for quite a while. Our plan is to do a full review of both the Avid and the Explorer 2 and then trying to draw some comparisons of those two gliders. One of the first things you notice about the Avid, like the Explorer 2, is for a high B it's got a relatively high aspect ratio. So it's 6.07, whereas most high Bs are kind of somewhere around the 5.6 to 5.7. Well, once you've done your basic aerodynamics, you know that higher aspect ratio is one thing that can give you more performance. I think particularly can give you an advantage in sink rate, but it's glide performance, performance across the whole range, glide and also sink rate. But the downside of higher aspect ratio, particularly with paragliders being soft gliders, soft wings, higher aspect ratio gives you the tendency to have the glider fly more as two gliders and bend and flex more. Generally gliders with higher aspect ratios have a bit more tendency to stall more easily, they can collapse more easily. That's a general experience. As the glider has got lower aspect ratio, you notice that it flies just as a block, and also that lower aspect ratio means that you've got less span of wing to actually turn around. So the challenge for Jin when they're making a glider like this with a higher aspect ratio for its class is to make a glider that feels solid, comfortable, and also that you can turn nice and tight. The higher the aspect ratio, just that one factor, the gliders become, just because if you think about it, the mechanics of it, you've got that longer wingspan to turn around, it's got to go in a bigger curve to go around. So when you're flying a glider with a higher aspect ratio, it's more difficult when you've got small punchy cores to turn really tight on those, because you're always kind of trying to turn tight but not spin the glider. When you do fly these gliders, you do definitely notice, I really notice the aspect ratio, but they've managed to make the glider feel very solid and taut, so that it's very cohesive. But looking back to the Carrera, that had more movement between the two sides of the wing. I think now with the Avid, which is built out heavier material, I haven't actually checked yet about the internal construction, but the glider feels very taut and very tight and solid and cuts through the air. So although I do feel like compared to the low aspect ratio gliders, it's a little, that higher aspect is a little harder to get round in the tight punchy cores. If you're flying in a big wide boaty thermal, no problem at all, then you don't notice any disadvantage as it were at all. If you're trying to turn tight punchy cores, it makes it more challenging. On the other hand, because the glider is so solid and actually it has very good energy retention, and Jin have managed to give the glider very direct, sharp handling, you can actually still make the glider turn and turn pretty tightly. But I think it's a little bit more technical to make the glider turn that more tightly compared to a glider with lower aspect ratio. I've been testing recently the Phi Maestro 2, which is aspect ratio is 5.56. I think it's just easier to turn and climb up in the punchy cores. On the plus side, especially in weaker conditions and weaker lift and weaker soaring conditions, you definitely notice that the Avid is very floaty. It's got a very good sink rate, very good climb rate. So when you're flying in the more marginal, weaker conditions, then you feel like you have a bit of an advantage. I think on the Avid, it's got a really good sink rate and a very good glide. So when you're just soaring on a ridge or turning in a bit of a bigger thermal, then you notice it's got a very good climb rate. Notice when I was flying in more turbulent conditions and also trying different harnesses, so flying with harnesses that are a bit more weight shifty, had more movement, I noticed with the Avid, say compared to the Maestro 2, that there was more movement going on between them. So I do feel that the pilot demands are slightly higher. With the Avid, a pilot's upgrading from a low B or even a mid B glider and wanted to upgrade to their first high B, depending on the pilot, then this generally wouldn't be my first choice for them. So yeah, I'd put the pilot demands of the Explorer at the higher end of the high B. It is a proper high B. The Avid is for a pilot who's looking for something that's got at the higher end of the high B class, that's going to give them, particularly they're interested in that very good climb and sink rate and very good glide. So they're looking for that, and they're happy with that. More dynamic and more feeling and handling and feedback compared to some other gliders. So pilots who like that, who like a glider who talks to them and like that kind of high performance glider feel. When you do wing overs with it and you do pitching and dolphining, you notice it just converts energy more, that higher aspect ratio. It's got that feeling like a higher class glider that sort of converts energy. And that also is another reason why I think it's better suited to pilots with a better degree of finesse and glider control. In terms of performance from our tests, so it's these tests, you can never be completely scientific about it. You can only be scientific in still air, and then that only tells you the still air performance. And then if you're flying in active air, well, you're never in the same bit of air twice. And even with other gliders as close as you can be, you can always get different results. You really notice when you're gliding next to each other how one of you is going up 1 minute and the other one's going down like this, and that just happens over and over. But through repeated testing, my impression is that the Avid's performance is very, very good in the high B class. It's because of the very solid leading edge. Despite the extra aspect ratio, the very solid leading edge means the glider stays solid, even right up to fully accelerated. It does start to get a little bit more nervy and twitchy, I think, than some of the high Bs, but it still feels really solid and efficient, particularly, as I say, in terms of its climb rate, its sink rate, and a very good glide at trim speed. Gliding next to some other high Bs, Nancy and I were flying next to each other. I was flying the Maestro 2, Nancy was flying the Avid, and when we went to full speed system, Avid has very good speed, got a good speed at trim, but its fully accelerated speed doesn't seem to be quite as quick. So for example, as the Maestro 2, that seemed to be faster at the top end. So, but maybe the Avid was more floaty in the weaker stuff. So there's, yeah, trying to do a kind of comparison a bit there. So there's kind of like pros and cons of each there. Like many high B gliders, it's got fully unsheathed lines. It's definitely give you the edge of performance. And for high B, pilots are tending to go up to the high B class because they're trying to get more performance. So a lot of pilots are used to that, but if you're flying somewhere where it's got very difficult terrain with grabby material and gorse pushers and stuff like that, then having the fully unsheathed lines might put you off.